I never thought a marriage could be threatened by something that technically happened before it even began. It was a quiet Tuesday night when I realized that the past doesn't always stay buried just because you build a life on top of it. Sometimes it waits patiently, watching, remembering, until the timing feels right to reach back in and tear everything open again. I'm sitting at my kitchen table long after midnight, the house finally silent. My 3 kids are asleep upstairs. The dishwasher hums softly. From the outside, this is the life I worked for. 12 years of marriage, routines, school schedules, shared jokes, shared exhaustion. Stability. And yet my hands are shaking as I stare at my phone, replaying the message that changed everything. I need to talk to you alone. It wasn't from my husband. It was from his friend's husband, a man who once slept with me, a man who now wanted to see me again, without my husband there. What terrifies me most isn't the message itself. It's how quickly everything that felt solid began to tilt the moment it arrived. Because this wasn't just about desire or temptation. This was about disrespect, about erasing boundaries, about dragging a long-dead version of me into the middle of a marriage I've spent over a decade protecting. My husband thinks this story starts last weekend at a brewery, after too many drinks and a careless comment from my oldest friend. He thinks it started when my past was joked about out loud, casually, like it was some funny memory instead of something I deliberately left behind. But the truth is, this story started much earlier. It started in my early 20s, when I was curious and reckless and hadn't yet learned how deeply choices can echo into the future. It started with a friendship I trusted. It started with a marriage that survived everything except the one thing it was never prepared for: people who refused to accept that I had moved on. And now, the men in my life, past and present, were on a collision course I never agreed to be part of. As I sit here in the dark, one question keeps looping in my mind, louder than the rest. How did a boundary I never crossed turn into the weapon that almost destroyed my marriage? And worse, how much damage had already been done before I even realized I was standing in the middle of it? Before any of this happened, before the text messages, the awkward silences, the panic in my husband's eyes, I was certain of who I was. I'm Jenny, 36 years old, married for nearly 12 years, a mother of 3, and someone who prides herself on having grown into her life rather than fallen into it by accident. I work full-time, manage a household that feels like a small logistics operation, and still believe in showing up for the people I love. I'm not impulsive, I'm not reckless, I don't chase drama. But I wasn't always this version of myself. When I met my husband, back when I was in my mid-20s, I was honest with him in a way that scared me at the time. I told him about my past, not because I thought it defined me, but because I didn't want secrets poisoning something new. That honesty included Tara. Tara and I had been inseparable since college. Roommates, best friends, the kind of women who shared clothes, secrets, and plans for the future over cheap wine and late nights. She was bold where I was cautious, confident where I second-guessed myself. We balanced each other. After graduation, when we were all still drifting, careers uncertain, relationships fluid, Tara started dating Mike. He was charming, loud, effortlessly confident, the kind of man who filled a room without trying. What happened between the 3 of us wasn't romantic or emotionally tangled the way people like to imagine. It was experimental, brief, messy in the way early adulthood often is. It happened 4 times, spread out over months, during a period when none of us were building anything permanent. Even then, I knew it wasn't something I wanted long-term. The novelty faded quickly. The attraction didn't deepen. I walked away without regret, without drama, and without any desire to revisit it. By the time I met my husband, that chapter was already closed. And he believed me because I showed him through every action that followed. We built our relationship slowly. We talked about values, about loyalty, about the kind of family we wanted. When we married, we didn't just choose each other. We chose a way of life. Kids, stability, boundaries. And for years, those boundaries held. Tara remained my friend. Mike remained her husband. We saw them a few times a year. Birthdays, casual dinners, group outings. I never hid the past, but I never revisited it either. To me, it was irrelevant. My husband, though, struggled more. He was polite, civil, but I could feel the tension in him whenever Mike was around. It's hard to sit across from someone who once touched your wife and pretend it means nothing. I understood that, and I tried to protect him from discomfort without cutting Tara out of my life. I thought that balance was enough. What I didn't see What I refused to see was that Tara and Mike hadn't left the past where I had. They remembered it differently. Where I saw a phase, they saw a fantasy. Where I saw a closed door, they saw something waiting to be reopened. And slowly, quietly, without my knowledge, they let that memory grow into something dangerous. By the time the truth finally surfaced, my marriage had already been standing in the shadow of a version of me that no longer existed, but that others refused to let die. Looking back now, I can admit something that's hard to say out loud. Part of me had gotten too comfortable, not in my marriage. I never doubted my love for my husband, but comfortable in the assumption that time automatically turns old mistakes into harmless stories. That if you grow up, everyone else does too. That if you move on, the people around you will respect that movement. I was wrong. The truth is, the warning signs didn't start at the brewery. They started months earlier, in small moments that felt easy to ignore because they were wrapped in laughter. Tara had always been the type to flirt with the edge of inappropriate. Even after she got married, she still liked attention, still liked feeling wanted. Sometimes she'd say things that made people raise an eyebrow, then laugh it off like, "Relax, I'm just joking." At first it was harmless. A suggestive comment here and there, a wink when Mike told a story, a teasing line tossed my way when we were alone. "God, remember when we were wild?" she'd say, like it was a shared inside joke. I would smile politely and steer the conversation somewhere safer. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to drag my husband into discomfort for no reason. The thing was, Tara didn't stop, and Mike didn't either. I started noticing how Mike looked at me, how his eyes lingered a beat too long, how his smile would sharpen when Tara referenced old times. If I stood up from the table, I'd sometimes catch his gaze drop too low before he corrected it. It wasn't blatant enough for me to call it out without sounding dramatic, but it was enough to make me feel watched. There were also moments that didn't happen in front of my husband, moments that felt more personal, more pointed. Once, after a group dinner, Tara hugged me goodbye and whispered into my ear, almost playful, "You know, Mike still says you were the best part." I froze, not because I wanted it, God no, but because it was the first time the past was spoken about like it was alive. I pulled back and gave her a look that was meant to say, "Don't." She laughed, like I was being uptight. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's just a compliment." But it didn't feel like one. It felt like a test. And then there was my husband. He'd never accused me of anything. He never questioned my loyalty. But I could see the strain in him after certain gatherings. On the drive home, he'd be quieter than usual, one hand tight on the steering wheel. Sometimes he'd ask casually, like he was trying not to make it a big deal, "Does Tara ever bring up back then?" And I'd answer truthfully, "Not really." Because at the time, I told myself Tara's comments didn't count. They weren't bringing it up in a serious way. They were just jokes. Loose lips, too much wine. But my husband's discomfort wasn't fading. If anything, it was getting sharper. I remember one night, maybe 6 months before the brewery incident, when we got home from a barbecue at Tara and Mike's place. The kids had fallen asleep in the car, their little heads tilted against the seatbelts, peaceful and unaware. I carried one inside while my husband carried another. We moved like a practice team, quiet and efficient. And then, once the kids were in bed, he leaned against the kitchen counter and said softly, "I hate being around him." My heart sank. "Because of the past?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, jaw tight. "It's not just that," he finally said. "It's how he looks at you, like he's waiting." I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to dismiss it. Tell him he was imagining it. Tell him Mike was harmless. But my husband wasn't a paranoid man. He was steady, grounded, the kind of person who didn't jump to conclusions without reason. So instead, I said the only honest thing I could. "I'll handle it." I meant it too. The problem was, I didn't. Not really. Because handling it would have meant admitting Tara and Mike weren't just friends anymore. It would have meant confronting the possibility that Tara, my oldest friend, didn't respect the life I'd built. And I wasn't ready to believe that. So I did what a lot of women do when something feels off, but not dangerous yet. I minimized. I rationalized. I convinced myself that the past only had power if I gave it power. Until last weekend, when Tara got drunk enough to stop pretending. And everything I'd been brushing aside finally stepped into the light. The brewery was loud in the way all crowded places are. Voices overlapping, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling in waves. It was supposed to be an easy night. A few drinks, some casual conversation, nothing heavy. That was the lie I walked in believing. We'd been there for the couple of hours already. My husband sat beside me, one arm draped over the back of my chair, relaxed but alert in the way he always was around Mike. Tara was flushed from drinking, her laugh louder than usual, her movements looser. I noticed it before anyone said anything. That slightly reckless shine in her eyes. She was in one of those moods where she felt bold enough to say whatever crossed her mind. Consequences be damned. Mike leaned close to her, murmuring something I couldn't hear. She laughed, a little too hard, and waved her hand dismissively like she was brushing away a secret. Then she turned toward me. "So," Tara said, her voice rising above the noise, "remember when we all used to have so much fun together?" The words landed like a dropped glass. For a split second, my brain refused to process what she'd just said. I stared at her, frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I could feel my husband's arm tense behind me. I smiled automatically, pure instinct, and jumped in before anyone else could. "Oh my God," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. "You mean those awful post-college parties? I don't miss those at all." But Tara didn't let it go. She tilted her head, eyes glittering, lips curling into a knowing smile. "No," she said slowly, "not that." The table went quiet. Mike chuckled under his breath like this was some inside joke the rest of us just hadn't caught up on yet. My husband stiffened beside me. I felt heat rush to my face, not embarrassment, but something sharper. Anger, fear. A sudden awareness that this was no longer something I could control. I cut in again, firmer this time. "Okay," I said. "I'm grabbing another drink. Anyone else want something?" I didn't wait for an answer. At the bar, my hands shook as I ordered water instead of another beer. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing through the tightness in my chest, trying to regain my composure. When I came back, the conversation had shifted, but the damage was already done. My husband barely touched his drink after that. On the drive home, the silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. The kids were with a sitter, so there was no buffer, no small talk, no distractions. Finally, he spoke. "What the hell was that?" I swallowed. "I don't know," I said quietly. "She was drunk." "That wasn't a joke," he said, his voice tight but controlled. "That was her testing something." I stared out the window, streetlights blurring past. "She crossed a line," I admitted. "I'll talk to her." We didn't fight. We never do. But the space between us that night felt heavier than any argument. Later, after we got home and the house settled into its familiar nighttime quiet, he sat on the edge of the bed while I changed into pajamas. "I need to ask you something," he said. I turned toward him. "Have they said anything to you recently?" he asked. "About wanting to revisit that?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't planned to tell him, not because I wanted to hide anything, but because I genuinely thought it was over. A bad joke, a moment fueled by alcohol. But now lying felt worse. I sat down beside him and took a breath. "They talked to me earlier this week," I said slowly. "Both of them." His face went still. "They asked if we'd be interested in doing something with them," I continued. I shut it down immediately. I told them no. For both of us. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. That scared me more than anger would have. "And you didn't tell me," he said. "I didn't think it mattered," I said honestly. "I said no. Hard no. I thought that was the end of it." He rubbed his face with both hands and exhaled. "What exactly did they ask?" he said. I hesitated, then forced myself to be precise. "They wanted me with Mike again," I said. "Possibly with Tara involved, and—" I swallowed. "They suggested you might want to watch." The word hung between us like poison. He looked at me then, eyes dark, something wounded flashing across his face. "I would never want that," he said quietly. "I know," I said immediately, "and they knew that too. Or they should have." He nodded once. "This changes things," he said. I knew he was right. Because this wasn't about the past anymore. This was about people who looked at my marriage and decided it was optional. And I had no idea how far they were willing to push to get what they wanted. That night, neither of us slept much. My husband lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, arms folded across his chest, like he was holding himself together by force. I lay curled on my side, facing away from him, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I kept asking myself the same question in different ways. How did I let it get this far? I had done everything right, or at least I thought I had. I'd been honest from the beginning. I'd said no. I'd chosen my marriage every single time, and yet, somehow, I still felt responsible for the fact that these people felt entitled to my body, my marriage, my husband's dignity. That kind of guilt doesn't make sense logically, but it settles anyway. In the dark, I whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't answer right away. Finally, he rolled onto his side and faced me. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "I need you to hear that." I nodded, but my chest still felt tight. I should have shut this down harder, I said. I should have confronted Tara the first time she made those comments. You trusted your friend, he said. That's not a crime. But trust doesn't protect you from consequences. The next few days were heavy. The house ran on routine, school drop-offs, meals, bedtime stories. But beneath it all, there was a tension neither of us could ignore. We were polite, kind, careful, and hyper-aware. I noticed every moment of distance between us, every pause before he touched me, every time his eyes lingered on my face like he was checking for cracks. It scared me. So 2 nights later, after the kids were asleep again, I told him I wanted to talk. I don't want this to sit between us, I said. I don't want it to turn into something bigger because we avoided it. He nodded. I know, he said. Neither do I. That's when I told him the part I hadn't admitted out loud before, not because it mattered to my loyalty, but because honesty demanded it. There were moments, I said slowly, when Tara would bring up the past and it felt flattering. He didn't flinch. He listened. Not because I wanted anything to happen, I rushed to add, but because being desired feels good, even when you don't act on it. I never encouraged it. I never reciprocated, but I didn't shut it down as aggressively as I should have. He was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't breaking us. This was forcing us to look directly at something uncomfortable and decide how to handle it together. After a lot of talking, we came to the same conclusion. This couldn't be ignored. I couldn't just quietly distance myself and hope it went away. Tara and Mike had crossed a line too clearly, too deliberately. If we didn't address it now, they'd assume the door was still open, cracked just enough to slip through. So I suggested something that made my stomach twist, just saying it out loud. We should talk to them, I said, together. My husband hesitated. I don't want to give them the impression this is negotiable, he said. It won't be, I said. I'll make that clear, I promise. After a long pause, he agreed, on one condition. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, we shut it down, he said. No politeness, no protecting their feelings. I nodded. That night, I texted Tara. I kept it short. We need to talk, all 4 of us. This can't be ignored. She responded almost immediately. Of course. We're so sorry if things got awkward. We never meant anything by it. That message made my blood run cold. Because never meant anything by it was the most dangerous phrase of all. It meant she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. And that told me everything I needed to know about how the next conversation was going to go. They came over the next evening, after the kids were asleep. I remember standing in the kitchen while my husband locked the front door behind them, my heart racing like I was about to walk into an exam I hadn't studied for. Our living room looked the same as it always did. Family photos on the wall, toys tucked into baskets, a faint smell of dinner still lingering. Nothing about this house invited the conversation we were about to have. Tara perched on the edge of the couch like she owned it, legs crossed, smile fixed in place. Mike sat beside her, relaxed, almost smug. He looked around our home with curiosity, not discomfort. That alone made my skin crawl. We didn't waste time. I need to be very clear, I said, sitting down across from them. My voice was steady, even though my palms were damp. What you asked me was inappropriate. It crossed a line, and it disrespected my marriage. Tara sighed dramatically. We already said we're sorry, she said. It was just a conversation. My husband leaned forward. It wasn't just a conversation, he said. You proposed sleeping with my wife, again. Mike laughed softly. Come on, he said. We weren't pushing anything. We just thought maybe everyone would be open-minded. There it was. The first crack. This isn't about being open-minded, I said. It's about boundaries. Tara rolled her eyes. You're acting like we asked something outrageous, she said. We all had fun once. We thought it could be fun again. My husband's jaw tightened. You thought I'd enjoy watching another man sleep with my wife, he said flatly. Mike shrugged. Some guys are into that, he said. We figured it wouldn't hurt to ask. The air in the room shifted. I felt something inside me snap, not rage, but clarity. This is exactly the problem, I said. You didn't ask me because you cared about me. You asked because you wanted something. And you assumed my husband's consent or curiosity was interchangeable. Tara scoffed. You're being dramatic. No, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You're being entitled. That word landed hard. Mike leaned back, arms crossed. Look, he said, we just missed what we had. And honestly, it was kind of special. Not everyone gets that kind of chemistry. I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. That chemistry existed when I was 22, I said. I am 36. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. And you don't get to pretend those years didn't happen just because it suits you. Tara's expression shifted, annoyance bleeding into defensiveness. So what? She said. You're saying we're bad people for remembering something fondly? I'm saying you're bad people for trying to drag me into it again, I said. Silence followed. Then Tara said something that finally made my husband stand up. Once you loosen up, she said lightly, I guarantee you'd enjoy yourself. That was it. My husband stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. This conversation is over, he said. You need to leave. Tara looked stunned. Seriously? She said. You're kicking us out over this? Yes, I said, standing beside him, because this house is built on respect, and you don't have any for us. They left soon after, muttering apologies that rang hollow, promises that they never meant to cause trouble. As soon as the door closed, I felt my knees weaken. My husband wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time since this started, I cried, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally understood the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And we were only at the beginning of it. After they left, the house felt wrong. Not unsafe, not damaged, just altered, like the air itself remembered what had been said inside it. My husband held me while I cried, his arms solid and grounding, but even in that moment of closeness, a quiet fear crept in. Not fear of him, never that. Fear of what exposure does to even strong marriages. Because when someone drags your past into your present, it doesn't just insult your partner, it forces you to look at yourself through someone else's distorted lens. For the first time in years, I questioned myself in ways I hadn't expected. Had I been naive, too forgiving, too casual about history that should have stayed buried? I knew the answers logically. I hadn't cheated, I hadn't crossed a line, I hadn't hidden anything. And still, the shame lingered, irrational but heavy. The next few days were the hardest. Not because my husband treated me differently, he didn't, but because I did. I caught myself over-explaining small things, telling him where I was going, even when I always had, checking his face for reactions that weren't there, reassuring him about things he'd never questioned. One night, as we brushed our teeth side by side, he noticed. You don't need to prove anything to me, he said gently. I swallowed. I know, I said. I just hate that this touched us at all. He leaned against the counter and met my eyes in the mirror. Hey, he said, they don't get to take anything from us. Not trust, not peace. I nodded, but the ache didn't disappear overnight. What made it worse was Tara. She didn't apologize again. She didn't call. She didn't text. The silence felt louder than words. It told me everything I didn't want to admit. I had lost her, not because of the past, but because she couldn't accept who I was now. And that loss hurt in a different way. She'd been in my life for almost 20 years. She'd known me before I became a wife, before I became a mother. I'd assumed that meant she respected the woman I'd grown into. Instead, she missed the version of me that served her fantasies. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found myself staring at a stack of my husband's shirts and suddenly broke down again. Quiet, shaking tears I didn't want anyone to hear. He found me anyway. We sat on the bedroom floor, backs against the bed, and for the first time, I admitted the fear I'd been avoiding. What if this changes how you see me? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He turned to face me fully. It already has, he said. My heart dropped. He took my hands. I see you more clearly, he continued. I see someone who chose us, who chose me, over and over again. That was the moment I realized something important. The darkest point of this story wasn't the proposition. It wasn't the confrontation. It was the brief moment where I allowed someone else's entitlement to make me doubt my own integrity. And I refused to stay there. Because the woman I am now isn't defined by curiosity in her 20s. She's defined by the boundaries she holds in her 30s. And I was finally ready to stop being polite about them. The turning point didn't arrive with shouting or confrontation. It arrived quietly, through a text message. It was a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary in every possible way. I was at work, halfway through answering emails, when my phone buzzed on my desk. I glanced at the screen, expecting a school notification or a message from my husband. Instead, I saw a name I hadn't expected to see ever again. Mike. My stomach dropped. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the screen, my pulse hammering, every instinct in my body screaming that this was not an accident. I picked up my phone and walked into an empty conference room before reading the message. I need to talk to you alone. There are things I can't say with your husband there. I felt something settle in my chest. Not fear this time. Not confusion. Confirmation. This wasn't about closure. It wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't about apology. This was about control. I took a screenshot immediately. Then another, just in case. My hands were steady in a way they hadn't been throughout this entire ordeal. When I got home that evening, I didn't soften the moment. I didn't ease into it. I handed my husband my phone. He read the message once, then again. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "So this is what he meant," he said quietly. I nodded. "He never wanted a conversation," I said. "He wanted access." That was the moment everything snapped into focus, not just for me, but for both of us. Tara's comments, Mike's entitlement, their insistence that this was no big deal. It had never been about mutual interest or shared history. It was about refusing to accept no. My husband handed the phone back to me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. That question mattered more than anything else. Not what should we do, not what do you think I want. What I wanted. I took a breath. "I'm not meeting him," I said. "Not alone, not ever." He nodded immediately. "Good." I typed my response while my husband watched. Not because he needed to, but because transparency felt like power now, not obligation. "I'm not comfortable communicating with you privately. Please don't contact me again," Mike replied almost instantly. "You're overreacting. I just want to clear the air." I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked his number. When I told Tara about it a few days later, during what would be our last lunch together, her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She looked genuinely shocked. "He texted you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and he wanted to meet alone." She went pale. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "He didn't tell me." That was the moment her story started unraveling. Over the next hour, the truth spilled out in pieces. Mike had been pressuring her for months. He'd been fixated on recreating the past. He'd framed it as something she wanted too, even when she didn't. And suddenly, the picture was clear. This wasn't just disrespect toward my marriage. It was a pattern of obsession that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with him refusing to accept reality. I left that lunch knowing one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. And I was done being treated like a doorway someone else could try to reopen, just because it once existed. Once the truth surfaced, everything unraveled faster than I expected. It didn't happen with one dramatic explosion. It happened in quiet collapses, conversations behind closed doors, unanswered messages, long silences where there used to be certainty. After that lunch, Tara stopped defending Mike. Not out loud, at least. She grew distant, distracted. Our messages became shorter, our lunches less frequent. And when we did meet, there was a heaviness in her that hadn't been there before. Like someone finally seeing the shape of a cage they'd been living inside. A few weeks later, she told me she'd moved out. "I'm staying with my sister," she said, eyes rimmed red but steady. "I can't do this anymore." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. Because while her marriage was ending, mine was quietly solidifying. At home, my husband and I fell into a deeper rhythm, not because we were trying to fix anything, but because honesty had stripped away whatever tiny layers of assumption still existed between us. We talked more, not just about what happened, but about us. Boundaries, expectations, the kind of people we want around our children, the kind of friendships we want modeling respect instead of nostalgia. One night, as we sat on the couch after the kids were asleep, my husband said something that stayed with me. "I'm proud of you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For choosing us without hesitation," he said, "and for not letting someone else rewrite who you are." Meanwhile, Mike's world was burning down in the background. Through mutual friends, people we didn't even realize were still watching, we heard that Tara had finally confronted him fully, that she'd discovered how much he'd been hiding, how often he'd been revisiting old fantasies online, how many times he'd framed his obsession as something romantic instead of invasive. He didn't deny it. He minimized it, which somehow was worse. When the separation became public, the tone shifted completely. People who'd once laughed off his comments started seeing them differently. Mutual friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped coming. The same charm that once made him entertaining now felt unsettling in hindsight. A few months later, Tara told me they'd filed for divorce. There was no satisfaction in hearing it. Just relief. Relief that the weight I'd been carrying, wondering if I'd somehow caused this, was finally gone. Relief that my children would never grow up watching me tolerate disrespect disguised as familiarity. Mike sent one final letter, a long apology, carefully worded, full of self-awareness that came a little too late. I never responded. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt just because the fire burned out. And then, slowly, life returned to normal. Or rather, a new normal, one with clearer lines and stronger foundations. 6 months have passed since that first message cracked everything open. On the surface, life looks exactly the same. The kids still leave backpacks by the door. The house still fills with noise at dinner time. My husband still reaches for my hand without thinking about it. But underneath, something fundamental has shifted. Not in a fragile way, in a stronger one. Tara and Mike finalized their divorce 3 months ago. I heard about it secondhand through people who assumed I'd want updates. I didn't. Whatever happens in their lives now belongs to them, not to me. Tara and I still talk occasionally. Lunch once a month, short messages on birthdays. The closeness we once had is gone, replaced by something quieter and more cautious. I don't hate her. I don't resent her. But I no longer confuse history with entitlement. As for Mike, I haven't heard from him since that last letter. He's moved on, apparently dating again, repeating patterns that no longer intersect with my life. And that distance feels like freedom. The biggest change, though, is inside my marriage. My husband and I now have a standing rule. If something feels uncomfortable, we talk about it immediately. No minimizing. No protecting other people's feelings at the expense of our own peace. We check in with each other, really check in, about friendships, boundaries, and expectations. We don't assume, we don't guess. We choose, every time. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Your past does not belong to people who refuse to respect your present. Desire does not excuse entitlement. And boundaries are not punishments, they are protections. The woman I was at 22 made choices that taught me who I didn't want to be. The woman I am now knows exactly who she is and who gets access to her life. My marriage survived because it was built on truth, not nostalgia. And my peace came from understanding one simple thing. Closure doesn't come from explaining yourself to the wrong people. It comes from locking the door and choosing not to reopen it. The story is over, and I'm exactly where I belong.